Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of SpyCam, where we take you behind the scenes of the esports industry to learn a little bit more about what we do and what other folks do to bring esports together on a day-to-day basis for some of the great events you get to watch from your homes. I am joined here today by Oscar Miranda, head of esports at Wargaming America. Oscar, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, of course, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. It's kind of cool. Oscar and I are reconnecting after probably not chatting for about 6 months or so. And back then, Splyce was almost a wholly different enterprise, huh?
Yeah, like I said before the call, I still go to followesports.com. It's the biggest reason why I tune into your page, and I still really value the TV guide type of model you guys inspired. So
Nice. You're
keep
like old school there. I like it.
absolutely, man, absolutely.
So for those of you that are maybe new to SpyCam, what we are is bringing in different insiders from the industry. Obviously, Oscar is a little different than some of the other folks we've had in that he runs a league for the World of Tanks game here in North America for Wargaming. So for any of you that aren't familiar with the game, the WGLNA has been in play for how many years now?
So we just completed 3 years of the Wargaming League, not just in North America, but across the world in Europe, Russia, and Asia as well.
That's awesome. That's really exciting. It's kind of that critical mass for a lot of leagues where people are getting the viewership. They're getting more settled. They're getting their place in the esports ecosphere, if you will. So that kind of lead right in my kind of first question. There's going to be some people who come in here and they say, "Well, I've never watched World of Tanks before. I don't really know much about it other than it's a game. It isn't Dota. It isn't League of Legends where they got big, global esports presences on the Big Six, as we called it, right? But you guys are obviously growing. That's got to be a challenge for you, right?
It's the constant challenge, and I think everybody that works on the team locally and globally understands that we're here because we want to step up to that challenge. We didn't join a title that already has everything going for it in terms of relevance in the esports space. We're taking something where everybody here is passionate about the game. We look up to the players who play our game at a high level, and we really want to make sure that we can present to the audience why these guys are the best at what they do and why it's fun to watch. So, of course, every day it's a challenge, both not just publicly, but behind the scenes as well, as making sure that we push to always steer resources towards promoting not just the Wargaming League, but the whole competitive ecosystem that supports the league from the ground up.
Your response kind of reminded me of the thing that's going on right now, of course, with ESPN and Yahoo coming into the space of esports reporting, let's say, or whatever you want to call it. How there's this: do you want to go with the challenge of some of these traditional more endemic that don't have ESPN and Yahoo money and exposure and stuff behind them, and there's a whole big conversation around that. So it's a little bit similar, right? You're choosing it because of what you're working for, you love the product, and to me that's always interesting about how important that is in entertainment. I'll pick on reality TV for a second. How many people who work on reality TV do you think really love the product and are really excited about that on a day-to-day basis, versus if you're working on a great movie or something like that? So it kind of correlates back for me what you're saying.
Yeah, of course, and I think it really is what ties us into our job right now is really passion for the product first, and passion for the industry as far as not just gaming but the esports space second. But we all here play World of Tanks pretty religiously, and it's hard to stay competitive with Wargaming's titles because we're always embracing a new title. You got ships, you got the console version, so it really does keep us on our toes.
The thing people are going to ask, kind of tangent a little bit here, is I'm guessing you didn't start your first esports career by running a major global league in a big top 10 title. So, Oscar, where did you come from in esports?
Yeah, I love it, man. And I'm not sure how long the show is because I could talk about myself all day. Uh, do it just in a few minutes. You know, it depends how far back you want to go, but I used to play Namco games religiously, Tekken Tag tournament to be specific, well, just fighting games in general. And I remember being a kid, this is about 20 years ago, let's say 25, shows how old I am.
I'm with you,
Uh,
brother.
used to see arcades were kind of a thing back in, say the late 80s, early 90s, different to arcades nowadays, where there was an appreciation for, when you had somebody who was really good at a video game, not just because of how many tickets he gets back, right? It would draw a lot of attention. There'd be a crowd around it. And when Tekken Tag tournaments started to get played pretty fervently out here, suddenly I was inspired because I saw there's this one guy, who everyone's lining up their quarters to play him, and it was a show. You would appreciate how good this guy was with one specific character, and a lot of people weren't even watching because they wanted to play or give him a shot. They just wanted to see how good this guy was at his craft. Um, what I started to do is I started to go around to different arcades around where I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I started to meet players that were really good in this area. The internet was really different back then. It's about 15 years ago, and
These kids today have no idea. I always think back to that era of like when you dial up and your mom would pick up the
oh yeah,
phone and
oh yeah.
oh boy.
Oh, absolutely. I'll get to that in a second. But still, you have to do a lot of the groundwork yourself on foot. And there wasn't really a communication medium. But as I started to meet people in it's called the Tekken Tag space, I did learn about a site. I'll give them a quick plug. It was called Tekken Zaibatsu at the time. But what I was able to do is get all these Tekken players who were the best Tekken players in the Bay Area to come out to my local arcade, and we did a tournament, a buy-in, and for me that was really special, just to be able to get the best players of the area come into one single place, and just it was fun. It was fun to really admire the skill set
That's
of
what
other people.
esports is all about, right? Is the competition of the best.
Exactly, exactly. And as much as I was inspired to be, one of the best Tekken players, not just in my area, but say worldwide, my focus started to shift because, again, showing my age and how different the internet was back then, I started to play PC games online for the first time, and one in particular was Command and Conquer Red Alert 2, uh, which I always credit for being the reason why I'm here in this seat right now. I was always an RTS fan. I remember playing with friends, connecting our PlayStations together, and screen sniping each other. You literally had to bring your own TV
Like
from
the old
your
Goldeneye
house.
days with the four
Oh yeah,
quads, for example.
absolutely. But playing online was a whole different experience. The first time I played online, I just one, I got my butt handed to me, but I had nothing but butterflies in my stomach to think that I could play this game against anybody around the world. And I started to get more and more competitive. I started to get interested in trying to be one of the best players in the world. And in doing so, again, I met a lot of people online, met a lot of people through the forums. What I noticed is that Westwood Studios at the time, the way they would funnel competition was just through a ladder, which inspired everybody to compete. That ladder was the reason why you played competitive games, to try and see your name at the top of that ladder.
Yep.
But there wasn't any kind of a league system. There wasn't any kind of like just a single elimination playoff. There was no March Madness type of excitement. So I basically asked people on forums if they were interested in signing up for a tournament that we would do single elimination online on a Sunday. I'm not sure why I picked Sundays, but it was most convenient for me, and that's just the way it was. And every month it became like a regular thing. People understood. I always had the gamer name as Judo. Everybody understood that Judo had tournaments on Sunday. If you wanted to play, you needed to register on the forums really quick. And the reason I mentioned this is because these were the things when one, I had a fantastic, let's call it in quotes, pro career playing Red Alert 2. It was just an amazing experience. Anytime anybody wants to hear me talk about how triumphant I was at Red Alert 2, I'd love to. But in case my wife is listening, I'd better not, because she hates it when I get really cocky. The reason why I bring this up is because one, it was inspired. It's what inspired me to be a part of the gaming industry. But when I came to work for Wargaming, I had my eyes set on being a part of that competitive space. Like, I had no other reason to really work here except for being a part of what I did in the past. Like I told the general manager at the time of my first interview, I'm here because I did this really for free for a different community, and I feel that you could draw from my expertise, you know, professionally. And when the opportunity came up, everything that I had did in the past, be it Tekken or Command and Conquer, it was basically my portfolio. It's what I used to get through the interview to show like, hey, this is what I did in the past, and this is what I could do now. So really, that's my background. That's really what got me through the door, is my personal experiences and being able to articulate them with a little bit of business acumen.
You know, it's interesting. A couple things I kind of picked out of what you said. I'll go to the tail end of working way backward. But you mentioning about you did all this stuff. You just did it because you wanted to, because you loved it. It was your passion. You weren't
Right.
getting any money for it. You were just doing it for that reason. That's what got you your entrance to the door. And there's this big raging debate in esports all the time that you should never do anything for free. You should get paid for your efforts, so on and so forth. And I love this idea of that utopian world where everyone gets paid for something. But
Hmm.
I come from theater, and people know
Right.
that. People who listen to this knows that. And in theater, you pay your dues way harder than you do in esports, because the money at the end, there are no $1 million prize purses at the end of the road in theater, you know. And so you get the idea that if I want to do this as a career, I want to do stuff every day that I don't even, if I didn't have bills, I wouldn't care I was getting paid or not, right? And I think that's something that anyone getting esports should figure out is, would I do this if I didn't have bills but I wasn't going to make any money for it? And if the answer is no, you're probably in the wrong career.
It's true. I mean, what I what keeps me here is I'm reminded that, you know, if you love what you do, you're always going to be working for the rest of your life, and
Yep.
because you're so happy to do it. But really, I think it's if there was one thing that I've been able to bring from my college education to the business now, is just, you know, an economics background. And in economics, you would understand that it's not exactly free. You know, it's an investment. So
Right.
sure, you're not getting paid right now, but what you're doing is you're building your own resume. You're building your portfolio. You're investing your time right now, so that in the future, when it gets called up, you have something that you can support,
Yeah.
showing active accomplishments.
Yep.
So I think calling it working for free is really just being short-sighted.
There's like a direct corollary there for so many things in your life. College itself is the perfect example. You pay them for the chance to go to college, but college is an investment in yourself. So it's no different than an internship or volunteering or starting something on your own. I mean, I literally founded a theater company. I spent more, like hundreds time more money than I would ever expect to take back in, right? Like that was a lost negative for me the entire time I did it for 5 years. So that's not why I did it, right? I did
Yeah.
it as a way to A, do great, awesome work, which I was excited about, and B, because it helped that next stage of my career, like you said. Like that was my resume to say, look, I built this thing and it was successful, and that's important, right? I'm gonna throw, jumping back further in your comments though. I like your comment about kind of being young and kind of the games of our time where it wasn't hop online, join the ladder, and play it, right? If you didn't make it happen, the competition kind of wasn't there. We're going to play the computer. Was the
Mhm.
option.
Right, right.
I don't know your age, but I'm 36, so we're probably somewhere around the same age.
35.
35, yeah. So the games I look back to were the original Street Fighter, the original Mortal Kombat, and Tecmo Super Bowl. And all three of those games were games where you could play the computer, and eventually you just figured out how to beat the computer. It wasn't even a challenge
Exactly.
anymore. But if you really want to have competition, you had three, four, five your friends come over, and you make little mini brackets, and you sit
Yeah.
on your couch, and you have a Mortal Kombat tournament, or you have a Tecmo Super Bowl tournament, in which so there's always somebody who picks the Oakland Raiders and wins anyway. But the point being that while you're doing it, you have developed something that is more exciting, even with 4 or 5 people. So hearing you talk about that at the arcade level is really cool. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. Because, you know, I mean, we mentioned Goldeneye before, right?
Oh yeah,
I
tons of
remember
hours in
thinking,
that game.
yeah, I remember thinking I was tops because all of my friends, they would just always win, and then taking the Nintendo 64 to my actually my choral class at in high school, and realizing, all right, this guy had a cheap way to beat me with a grenade launcher. But it was whether it be Street Fighter, Tekken, or any other game, you know, if you're truly as competitive as most of us are, you know, you can't be capped by the ceiling of who your friends are and their abilities. You got to
Yeah.
expand that. So the arcade was at the time the next, you know, next best level to take your skills to.
You talk about
Uh,
Goldeneye, Oscar, and like, here's a little admission I probably shouldn't say, but I almost failed out of college because of that game. So there were, I lived on this floor where our lounge had an old crappy CRT television, but it was still a television. And so
yeah,
one of my neighbors would bring it out his Nintendo every night, and we'd hook it up in the lounge, and four of us would sit there from anywhere 9 p.m. till 6 a.m. I mean, who knows, right? Some nights the sun's coming up, and we're like, I have class in like an hour and a
yeah.
half, you know?
I could raise you that story with my own Red Alert too. To play at the level that I was playing, it meant that you just play all day. There's nothing
Yep.
else to do except for sleep and play and improve your ability. Obviously, my parents weren't happy, and I was living with my parents at the time.
Right.
And I also quite nearly failed college, except what I cleverly did was drop all my classes except for the ones that I absolutely needed just to transfer to a 4-year school. And then I transferred and I actually finally let go of the game completely. But, in the end, it goes back to the investment talk that we talked about.
Yep.
Is that little did I know that this was pretty much going to be something that I would build a future on 10 years later.
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna grab a question from chat here because I think it's the one that's on people's minds the most. I tweeted about it last night. It's really kind of a big thing. Oscar, I don't know if you've heard this story. There's a big because you deal with teams on a regular basis. Obviously, that's a big part
Right.
of your job. We have this big ordeal in Heroes of the Storm right now, where this owner is apparently threatening players that he's going to have criminal charges pressed against them. Their contracts are coming out that things like they were going to get 8% of prize money. The players, 8%. They were getting $900 salary the entire year. These were appalling to read, right? And of
Yeah.
course, like in esports, I'm sure you've run across this 100 times. The players really just they wanted to compete so badly. They signed contracts they knew they were bad. Bad things kept happening. So even though they probably should have stepped back and said, "Ah, we shouldn't do this," they kept getting deeper and deeper until it imploded, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I talk a lot about, from my end, one of the big things I do with players, I'll sit down, I walk through the contract with them. I literally go line by line and say, here's what it is, here's what you're committing to, here's why I did some of these things that sound scary. I didn't write this, a lawyer did, etc. How have you had to deal with this over kind of your span of running a league in which the teams are so integral to your success? And do you have any specific stories that you may want to share?
To be perfectly honest, is we've been a lot more hands off when it comes to signing or being a medium between players and official esports organizations, I think, than other titles. But it is something that we want to look towards in terms of making the Wargaming League more relevant in the esports space. So really not a whole lot of hands-on experience that I can offer there, and don't want to step on anyone's toes.
Of course, of
But the
course.
few stories I have heard, and the park that I stand in is that I really think that the organization shouldn't touch prize money. I think the prize money is for players. I think an organization has other means that they can monetize. If an organization is really as strong as they are, then they're going to find other ways to monetize. But prize money, I just think I'm just thinking myself as a player. That's something that I would personally be working hard towards, and it's something that's so easy to lose. And just taking a few points from what you said right now, if there was one advice that I would give to some of the players, which just coming from Brazil, uh, we had a similar discussion, and in the end, it was settled that all right, let the players have the prize money, and let's find other ways to monetize.
Yeah, I guess it's an ever evolving discussion, not just in esports, but sports in general, is what part of compensation belongs where. And esports has the extra kind of um, I don't know, we'll call it arm, where if you're in traditional sports, there is the league and there's the players, and that's it. So we've got the league, the players, and the developer. And so, wargaming, you're a little different in that you run your own league. So obviously, you eliminate one of the arms, right?
Yeah.
But that's still a challenge, I have to assume, because I look at any of the games we're in at Splyce, and there's always things I see where you're like, I know, just me being an intelligent human being, I can see why that might have been a difficult choice for the developer. Of if we do one, it's good for the game. If we do the other, it's good for esports. There might be somewhere in the middle, but there might not be. I'm guessing those are challenges you come across.
It constantly is, and part of our job is to articulate the need if we're pushing for esports and with a very, as objectively as possible, what's it going to do for the business? So we're not here. Uh, Ultimately, we're here to push the wargaming business forward, and esports is just a component of that. So anytime there's a conflict of interest, it's something that we have to objectively look at. We can't be tied down to that. No, the Wargaming League is what it is, and we want it to be bigger. Well, we have to answer why. What's exactly the Wargaming League doing for wargaming in the end? But it's the other side of what the public doesn't see. Behind the scenes, these constant professional arguments, let's call it.
Yeah, that's the nice way to say it. I like it. Well, and what's funny is, I mean, I spent 5 years in manufacturing, and you see it in every industry. Everyone has different ultimate ends, and one of the kind of goals of anybody who's in a leadership position of a company is to make sure that whatever it is you're targeting, everyone's clear about it. And my favorite example is, I don't know if you know the Mark Zuckerberg story of his measurements at Facebook. He had originally said, their goal is to get people to sign up. That seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? You want people to sign up to Facebook. And for a while, they couldn't figure out why they were having such high turnover, people who would sign up and then just not ever do anything. And it took a while before they figured out that it's not signing up that does anything. It's getting people to have friends on Facebook, to connect with those friends. And so Mark Zuckerberg changed the metric. He said our key metric is every person that signs up is not successful until they connect with 5 friends. Because they figured once they connect with 5, they'll get a 6, they'll get a 7, and that's how you engage them. And what that did is it changed the way everyone, from the developers to the social media people, everybody, the way they were building and marketing the platform, And so what you're mentioning kind of relates back to, in a perfect example of you're one piece of a larger thing, right? So what wargaming as a whole has a goal, that's important for how you choose to direct a league, would you say?
Yeah, ultimately, absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that, because we're really going in this direction that similarly, what we value the most as a company isn't just so much that the guys are playing competitively, but the guys are teaming up with other players to play competitively. And what you'll start to see is more resources funneling towards that, getting guys not just to funnel to be the best in the world, but the pursuit of it is really what draws the most interest for our side.
Sure, this the social aspect, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I'm an old World of Warcraft player. I'm Laser Chicken, for anyone that doesn't know that reference. And Warcraft is like the ultimate social game, right? And I remember thinking back as I tried to leave Warcraft to go on other games. At first, it was really challenging because you'd try games and feel like even another Blizzard game, StarCraft, right? Like StarCraft was a fun game I played 15 years ago, and I go to play StarCraft 2, and I lacked that element. I lacked feeling connected. There's some stuff there, but it was a big change. So I can see why. And it's not about everyone having this massive social element like Warcraft does. I just use it as an example because they're so prevalent. But I think that's what drives us to game, right? It's not just the competitiveness. It's also about community. It's about being able to look over to somebody and start a conversation just around your common interests.
Yeah, and I don't know. I'm sure there's guys out there. I wasn't this way as a competitive player myself. So you can't do it alone. You have to learn from your peers. Because you mentioned StarCraft 2. Red Alert was also a game where it was 1 versus 1, but you could create a clan. And ultimately, when I created a clan myself, I had my own clan mates that we all had this common interest. We would learn off of each other. So while your goals might be individual, ultimately, the social element's what's going to, I think, drive you to really attain those goals.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I went to BlizzCon and TwitchCon, and I went to Super Smash Con, right? But all these different games, right? And so they're all very different. The communities are very different. But ultimately, what's that one thing that ties everyone together? They're going to go there. They're going to meet some friends they haven't seen in a long time, or maybe even ever. They're going to shake hands. They're going to say hello. Or even going to an event as a player, you're going to get to see those people you play online against all the time, and really face to face. Maybe have a drink together. Like that bond is something that it's irreplaceable, right?
Absolutely, and it's fun. I just got back from Brazil, where
Jealous.
we qualified. Yeah, we qualified our last team to the grand finals, which I know you're going to let me plug, but I'll do it right now anyway.
Yeah, do it.
The grand finals coming up April 8th, April 9th. It's the biggest event that Wargaming throws every year. Product releases, announcement, nothing compares to the Wargaming League grand finals. But we finally qualified this last team. And it's been really exciting to see them, these guys who have been playing together for 3 years. Within a year, we finally opened the door to get them a live competition. So they meet each other for the first time. They meet their opponents who they've hated for about a year. for the first time live, and to see those elements come to life where you've experienced it in other regions. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, 3 years to me. You mentioned that's how long you guys been around. That's like, year one is figuring things out. Year two is finally being able to act on some things you wanted to grow. But year three, at least from what I've seen across other leagues, is where you can really start to make your stamp as an esports league. Would you agree with that?
It's funny. I wasn't sure if there was such a model, but we are kind of at a space, excuse me, at a place. We're pretty proud of our most dominant region being RU was able to hit 65,000 viewers for the regional finals
That's awesome.
just a couple of weeks ago, and those are the kind of numbers I think we would typically see from the other titles who are most predominant in the space. But for us to get there, it kind of shows us that it's taken a while. I think we've openly admitted that when we kicked this door open, we probably didn't exactly know what we were getting ourselves into.
Right.
3 years down the line, it feels like pieces are really coming together. And even the North American finals, which we had, I think, about a month ago, the context was pretty interesting, where we had our first 2 seasons in Las Vegas, and we returned to Las Vegas again for, I think, what was our 7th season. And it was just night and day difference between where we were and where we've came from, how far we've gone.
Right. And I actually remember when you guys launched because I didn't know the game at the time. It was a big deal because you were probably the first one since Riot to really take your product and say we're going to do this, right? We're going to that we're not going to do the Valve or the Blizzard or any of these other game approach where they just kind of let the community do it and they support it a little bit at various levels, but we're going to make a league and we're going to make it awesome, right? And I think that was kind of a big deal because Riot had kind of always been the outsider in that, if you will. Everyone, well, why does Riot do that? Let us make our own tournaments. Let us go back to being at the arcade with our quarters lined up, like you're saying. And here we are in 2016, where it's actually becoming more of that standardized league type of thing. Not necessarily the developer side, but I mean where we're getting to being like, this is the dominant league in that particular game, or
Right.
so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, I think it highlights the commitment from, in our case, the publisher. I think if we sat back and tried to encourage maybe some third parties to hold these events for us, it wouldn't be as powerful as what we envisioned for our title in this space.
Yep.
So if anything, when you get that kind of support, the name behind it shows that, okay, Wargaming's committed to seeing this scene grow, and it just gives more confidence in the player, hopefully, that there's something there worth committing to.
The name thing you mentioned is interesting because I've actually heard people say that with other developers when they want to throw a tournament, they'll go like, "Oh, we just want to be able to say that they support this, right? It's not they don't even want money, they don't want whatever. They just want to say so and so developer supports it because it gives you like a stamp of like quality or something, right? It says that this is going to be a high quality event."
Right. And I think we've put our stamp out there behind some events that probably don't meet the standards that we would like. And I don't want to, undercut anyone, so
Of
I won't go
course.
into details, but it's pretty easy. I think if you do a couple of searches and find some of these events that everyone collectively is complaining about across all titles. So I think the stamp alone might help, but ultimately really owning the event as a publisher, as a developer, I think there's no par for it.
There's really something, Oscar, that you've mentioned that I love because I run our company like a tech startup. Everyone assumes we're an esports company. We're going to run like entertainment. We're a tech startup. I look at Facebook, Twitter. I look at those successful companies. And one of the things that every successful person in tech will tell you is the person that should sell your product is you. You shouldn't get a marketing person. You should sell your product. And why is that? Well, it's not just because you know it the best. It's because you're the most passionate about it, right? The way you say the words is different. The way you talk about it. And you mentioned earlier that you all play the game incredible amounts. Obviously, you could be elsewhere. You choose to be at this place to work. But also, at the end of the day, just the fact that Wargaming is doing the league you mentioned versus farming it out to someone like ESL or any of the tournament producers, MLG at the time, so on and so forth, would have been like, it's not they wouldn't have tried as hard, they wouldn't be capable, I guess is the way I'd say, of trying as hard. It's not their product, right?
Well, I think the ones that you mentioned in particular, I can't remember any serious reason why they can't achieve success. They've all actually done really well. But
Yep.
ultimately, yeah, of course, our interest, it goes back to what you said. Are we doing this because of esports? Or are we doing this because we're trying to improve just wargaming across the space, across the industry, I should say. And ultimately, that's why we're here. We're here because of wargaming, because of, in this case, World of Tanks and the other titles. Esports, while it's our focus, it's not the reason why we keep driving what we do.
Right.
It's because of the product in the end.
So let's kind of turn it a little more on yourself and your role, because some people out there might be saying, "Man, I would love to be able to produce tournaments." You mentioned your progression is perfect, right? You did it on your own, and now you do it on a more grand scale with a much bigger budget. But ultimately, you're putting together an event for a bunch of people, right? Talk a little bit about what you think were the most critical skills that got you to being a successful tournament organizer.
Well, it's I hate to be so cliche, but for me, it's really just been the passion that's pushed me through. But I felt like I always needed a strong reason to get in the door. So getting a college education was just to get a skill set in the corporate world that would get me into the door. When I was working, when I was going to school, I was working for a couple of tech companies doing customer support, and ultimately that's what got me in the door at Wargaming. Once I got my foot in the door, then it was about using the stuff that I'd done as a gamer to try and convince the company that this was the correct path for me to follow. But as far as getting involved, I would highlight the rest of the team here. As example, a lot of the guys know Hypnotic. Hypnotic developed some things for a portion of our game called Clan Wars. We recognized it, we saw it, and we brought them in.
Yeah.
You, Ans210, Trezor, they were all very, very active in the World of Tanks community. We recognized it, we saw it, and we just brought them in. And eventually, this is what's made our team one of the most successful, I think, worldwide in terms of pushing wargaming and World of Tanks further into the esports space. So yeah, my advice is, sure, you got your bills to pay, find a way to do it. Luckily, I did it by bartending on the weekends, which was enough just to get ends meet. But you have to really feel that you're investing your time for what your ultimate goal is. If in case it's esports, then really treat it as that, as an investment.
Yeah, I like that, and I also like your mention about kind of picking people out of the community. I've seen that across many games, not just for esports, but even for like the game side, right, the game developer side.
Right.
And that's, I think, you think you're doing something for a passion project, which you are, right? You're doing because you love it. You're making this great thing for this game, and it turns out a bunch of other people love it. And any good game developer is smart enough to go, if everyone else loves that, we probably love it too, right?
Yeah, of course, and I can tell you from personal experience, when we put an ad out there because there's a need, you already have some of the guys in mind, and you're just hoping that they're going to send their resume through. So even if you don't get a direct call, definitely put your name out there, because you never know if they're already interested in you, and they're just hoping that you're showing just as much of an interest on the other side.
So, it sounds like you, I mean, you obviously do some hiring there. I do some hiring. I'll kind of shift into the gear of hiring, because that's a big thing in esports. It's not just having the skill set; it's getting hired. And if you ever follow my Twitter, you'll know that my personal pet peeve is, I'll get number one, can we DM, and number two, sent from my iPhone at the end of an email, and meaning they spent clearly a lot of time and thought in putting into the email request to me. The number one, the people's inability to really understand how you apply for a job or request even, right? Not that I'm
Yeah,
listing a
sure.
job, they're requesting, is there an opportunity? And then also their unawareness of the fact that we are now on a space where you are very public. And if I Google your name or your tag or whatever, and I see, pictures of you trashing someone on the forums, or you're toxic or whatever, like, you're never going to work for me. In fact, you're never going to work for anybody. It's really easy to find now, right? Have you, I mean, you mentioned the good side, right, of finding those people that are already out there. Have you had some of the other side of that where people are just, you're constantly sifting through poor applications, that kind of stuff?
Hey, I mean, it's a good example. I mean, going back to us being part of you know the industry back when it was much younger, the internet back when it was like 15 years ago, something I didn't have to worry about necessarily myself back then. But nowadays, it is true. We do look up guys. We do look up not. Not that their clan affiliation is bad, but just we look through their clan affiliation to try and get the context of the other clan members. Hey, how do you like this guy, kind of a thing. Uh, but I do think that it's critical. It's important that you maintain a positive image, because you never know when it's going to come back to bite you.
There was I had Rahul Sood from Unicorn on, I think my second guest about 2 months ago, and he mentioned an interesting thing that they any new recruits, they have them play a game of League with somebody in the office,
Cool.
and it's very telling how they act in game, right? Because you react in a certain way, maybe you don't think it through, and imagine you're playing the game and you start like getting really angry and frustrated to play, and they're like, oh, we need a guy who's calm and cool-headed for this particular role. He's not going to be the right guy, so, or gal or whatever. So.
And as a gamer, you're essentially creating your own kind of a brand.
Yeah.
So it's important, if you are that kind of a player that lashes out, then my advice to you would be to create an alt account where you don't have to worry about your brand. Keep your brand safe, keep it clean, keep it pristine, and go fight those dirty fights in some other kind of a way.
Yeah, there's this. I'll use Ocelot because he's a friend of mine who runs G2. I think he's the perfect example of somebody who early on had a lot of flack for the way he was, was cocky and so on and so forth. And I won't use any specific words or toxic or anything like that because I wasn't around that. I just hear stories, right? But he's one who will openly come out and say, "Hey, look, that was years ago. I've grown up. I'm a different person now." And I've talked with him. I've hung out with him. We've had some good conversations, and I can see somebody who has a maturity there, and you can see where he almost looks back. It's just like he hasn't said it, but you can see it, saying, "Man, I almost have to atone for my sins." Whereas if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have to deal with that crap, if you will.
And it's not to say that if you have let's call it a blemish on your record, you're not going to be able to
Right.
achieve the success you're looking for. Personally, I actually laugh. Back when I was more involved in running community tournaments, I got a good lesson in what I used to be as a player. I used to troll Westwood Studios. I used to be one of those guys saying, "Hey, why aren't you doing this for us? Why aren't you doing this for us? You guys
Oh
are terrible."
boy, yep, I know
Yeah.
that.
And any time, if had that ever come up, I would have defended it and just say, "Hey, I was a player. It's a lot younger back then." But it's funny. It was the first lesson I learned to be on this side, and realize, okay, here's this guy who's probably a lot like me. He's probably 20 years old, and he loves this thing more than anything else. He's playing 18 hours a day, and that's the reason why he lashes out the way that he does. So I think, sure, you gotta be as careful as you can, but in the end, if you did do something that probably doesn't look positive on you, then you just have to find a way to explain it. And in my case, it's helped me understand the guys who let's say troll Wargaming Esports, World of Tanks Esports. The way I see it is that they're just super passionate about the product, and they want the best. It's something that we have in common.
Yeah, that's a good perspective because I don't know that everyone has that perspective of being able to separate when people are passionate versus when they're just plain bad, and we all have our bad moments. I mean, hell, I've had my moments of toxicity out there. Anybody that's played a competitive game with me can tell you that I've gotten mad before. I'm one of those guys, but
I called out one of the developers at the time to 1v1 me, on forums. So yeah, I know exactly what it's like.
That's awesome. Yeah, I remember having to go when I was going to start this company. Maybe it was just shortly after I started the company. I went back to my Twitter and I realized that I didn't use my Twitter for a while, and I came back and I was using it for the company. And I looked back and I was like, oh my God, I used to just use this Twitter to be mad about a game. This is my way to contact the developers directly and say, why does this thing suck about your game?
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden that I was the developer, I was the person with the product, and I wanted that feedback from people, but in a constructive way. You're right, you learn to go, man, I was a jerk, so
My biggest peeve as a player was really just cheating. It was a lot easier back then than what it is now for our title, and something that reminds me why we need to keep pursuing anti-cheat prevention.
Yep.
But back then it was really easy to, okay, this guy beat me, so I'm just gonna disconnect my modem and wash the game. And that was something that I could not tolerate the developers at the time sitting back and letting it happen. So it was something that always got me into trouble.
Yep. So as we've grown and we're now uh, hopefully away from those toxic days.
Right.
What do you see as the next great challenge for esports or even for wargaming? I mean, now you're going to year four. What does year four like for you guys?
We've saying that we've come a long way. I think we feel like we're sitting on something that's going to work. Finally, we have all the pieces in the right place, and now it's time to really just add fuel to this fire. One, we have more resources committed to us to have features in the game that are going to make it easier for players to participate in competitive events, socialize with each other, to really pursue, if they choose to do so, stardom within the Wargaming League. But also, I think we're finally at the time where we can reach out to organizations, non-endemic partners, guys who are interested in being part of the esports space along with Wargaming League, because I think our next goal is really to make the Wargaming League even more relevant in the esports space than it is right now. You talked about the top six, and that's our goal, really breaking into those kinds of metrics that they pull.
Yeah, it's interesting because I kind of I watched this progression over the last year from titles that are in that middle group like yourselves, Super Smash Brothers. I guess StarCraft is now there. I mean, they used to be in the top, but they're probably there now. You've got Street Fighter 5 coming out, and we'll throw Call of Duty kind of on the border, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
bigger, sometimes in the bottom. But what's interesting is in all of these cases I've just mentioned, it's developer support that's the big difference between being even on the border and being the middle group, right? So
Right.
you're seeing Nintendo actually give a shit for the first time ever. You're seeing Capcom, was this the second or third year they've supported the tour? You saw Activision start the World League this year for Call of Duty, where these people I said people, these companies are saying, well, I think you said it best. Like esports isn't just this little piece. We're gonna work to further integrate it both into what we do as a game developer, but also in the to get in that upper echelon. You can see all those games kind of want to do it, and it'll be interesting to see. Someone's got to fall out. Someone's got to move up. That's just the nature of our business, right? I'm curious what it'll end up looking like a year, 2 years from now.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. And something that I really want to emphasize is that, these things take time, especially when it's a global company. The larger the company is, you'd understand the harder it is to push things through.
Yep.
And we're right at we're right at the place where we want to be. And yeah, I think a lot of our players who unfortunately dropped off over the last 3 years didn't have the patience to probably stick it out. But over the next year, particularly over the next 2 years, you'll see this kind of refocus within the client we're all excited about right now.
There's a interesting, you mentioned about being a big company. I worked in corporate America, but I worked in a mid-sized company, and we had, I think there was like four executives, five, something like that. And I remember that one of the things I loved the most is I would want them to do something, and I would have to get one person's approval. Almost
Mhm.
all the time. It was rare to get a second person. And that was amazing because I was able to be so nimble in my job. And I compare that to other places I've worked where that's not at all how it was, right? You put something in and you wait for it to go through chains, or even just dealing with game developers and such now, where game developers are huge. And if you want to do something with one of the big game developers as a tournament organizer or a team or whatever, you can't expect to go get the guy you talk to on the phone to make any decisions. That's just almost never going to happen.
Mhm. Yeah, that's just part of the job. It's the other side that's not seen publicly, is having those conversations behind the scenes, and I don't want to say winning those arguments to make it seem like it's always an argument, but really just objectively looking at what you're doing and does it make sense for the company. It's always a process, but fortunately, it's one that we've been on the winning side more often.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you probably wouldn't be here in the third year otherwise. I mean, we've seen plenty of them not make it through year one even, right? Infinite Crisis being the most recent example, probably. Only even the game itself was only open for a couple of months. So it's interesting. You say it's long, 3 years. I almost think it's it's short. It's both. It's short and long, right? Just getting to there isn't really that far, but people don't realize they just got to give it a little bit of time, right?
A lot went into it. So much has changed, but it does feel like it was just a year ago that we were in Vegas for the season one finals.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I worked for a tournament organizer prior to working at Splyce. That's how I transitioned from theater into esports, and it was 2.5, 3 years ago, something like that. It feels like 6 months ago when I was putting on World of
Yeah,
Warcraft and Hearthstone tournaments, so.
yeah. I have to count myself just to be reminded.
So you have a nice fit in the industry right now. Obviously, your biggest focus is World of Tanks or World of Warships or any of those pieces that you guys have for esports. But in general, we're still all one big industry. We're all one big happy family,
Right.
so on and so forth. What do you see as the one or two biggest challenges we as an industry face? I mean, are there ones that you guys talk about that are really important that you also maybe even feel that it's your obligation to try and support or try and look at?
Taking a cue from the players, it seems like the players are really concerned about having some kind of management system. Say like take the IOC as an example, right? They oversee a ton of different sports and how they all fall under the one umbrella of Olympics. But it seems like there is a concern from the player side of having management that oversees esports across all titles. I think that's a really broad, really complex discussion argument, but it's one that I always see pop up whenever you and I bump into each other at an esports conference.
Yeah.
Not to say that it's something that we're less concerned with. Obviously, we're just trying to be a little more relevant in the space, so we don't have nearly the problems that say Valve and Riot do.
Yep.
But it's something that we don't lose sight of.
Well, what's interesting about that conversation about people want to call it unions, whatever you want to call it, right? But the point being of having some kind of standardization, some kind of voice, is this. There's a kind of a catch-22. If you include all the games, it gets infinitely more complex. But if you don't include all the
Right.
games, how do you deal with multi-game organizations, right?
Right.
I mean, we have six, and that's not even it's not even close to as many as some of the old boys, if you will, that have 9, 10, 11 titles under their organization. So I know that, for example, already one of the challenges we run into is Riot rules are different than every other organization because they have their very specific set of rules and a very specific organization. It's not necessarily a bad or a good thing, it's just a challenge, right? And so now we've got to take that into consideration, how we run the whole company, even though it's only one team. So this kind of, let's say there were a World of Tanks player body, right? If you're and you have, let's say you only have three other teams, not even a lot. Does that change how you run the other teams? Do you now have to consider if that's going to affect your organization? I think there's arguments for both sides of the table, right? But I
Uh,
don't know how it works.
I'm gonna have to tap into you for experience on dealing with partners because it sounds like that's a position I wouldn't want to. I don't envy myself that you have to deal with so many different partners and your brand at the same time. So yeah, good luck.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's this part where if we were, I always use the Dallas Cowboys because Dallas Cowboys are so iconic, they're so recognizable, right? I'm not a Cowboys fan, but that tells you I'm not a Cowboys fan. I still
Sure.
use them as the example. And if you're the Dallas Cowboys, you are concerned with one thing and one thing only, making the Dallas Cowboys look awesome, and that's all that matters. If you're in esports, you're concerned with making all these titles look awesome as
Yeah.
well as your own personal brand, and that's a really interesting. Everything from the way you do social media to the way you display graphics on your website, everything is just different because of that. And I mentioned, partners as complex as Riot. Again, complex isn't a bad word. I mean, complex can be a very good word, right? It can be how they've got things really organized and structured in a lot of ways, down to the nitty gritty of Smash, where everything is very, freewheeling and it's, dudes showing up in t-shirts to play a game, right? Almost back to your days of doing arcade tournaments, right?
Right. Right.
And everywhere in between. So I think that getting back to this or player body organization question, there's also a question of where would it end, right?
Yeah.
Are you? I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually technically in a union. I'm what they call like a dormant member or whatever because I don't. I'm not active. for the Actors and Stage Managers Union for stage. So I've been in the union for 10 years, and it's some very structured, strict rules about what I'm allowed to do for the rest of my life. And if I break into those rules, I can be removed from the union. And if, say, I ever wanted to do that again, I could be barred from rejoining, right? So the big thing in that space is how, if you look at let's say you're doing a show off Broadway, it's this little 50-seat house and stuff, and you have to make that decision. Do we go with union? It's more expensive, but we get better quality people. Probably not, right? Just can't do it. Now, let's say you, Oscar, you're a union actor and you want to do the show. You've got to make that really hard decision of do I
Yeah.
want to risk that by doing that? But it's a great opportunity, and that's a challenge even on that scale. Then you take esports, where we have competitions at a million different levels. And imagine this body with as their rules grow. Again, I'm not against the body. I think it's something that needs to happen at some point because I just don't know how, right? I have no idea. I'm not an expert on this. But that's going to be a huge challenge is how do you make sure that you don't block out players for what they do to start their career? How do you make sure that you don't stifle or even suffocate these lower level leagues, right? Imagine, I mean, that's in a way what happens in the League of Legends scene, right? You've got the LCS and almost nothing else because the top players just can't play in those other leagues. They're just not allowed to, and that's a good and a bad thing, right? There's a plus and minus to all. So
Yeah, and I think the last conference you and I were both in, that thought was actually shared exactly the way you articulate it. This might be a need for the major titles, but still not probably it's not something that Wargaming is totally concerned about because we ultimately can just make the call that's in the best interest of the players. But it's something that nobody's losing sight of. As the space grows, as the space gets integrated with cable television,
right.
Turner Broadcasting, it's something that in the future it's probably gonna be there whether we like it or not.
Yeah, there's rumblings on top of Turner that there's stuff happening in Europe. I don't know the specifics, but I don't know what game, but there's rumblings that cable television it's more than just Turner. So it's coming, right?
Yeah, and another thing, I think your Dallas Cowboys analogy is a great one, and it reminds me. I think Europe is a little more offers a stronger comparison to esports with traditional sports in the sense that take Barcelona for example. They're a brand that encompasses several sports, not just soccer. They're mostly known for soccer, but they also do basketball. They also do
Right.
a couple other sports. So it's something that I think here in North America we don't have a whole lot to compare it to because Dallas Cowboys are just football, nothing else. But in Europe, they've been doing this model for a long time where a club is an athletic club that runs a lot of different sports. And usually it's one of those sports that drives their brand.
The only one we do here in North America, and I think it's done very poorly, is college, right? So,
Right, right.
and there's a lot of things wrong with the way college does
Yeah.
athletics. We all know. So,
Yeah, I think if we're looking at reforming the rule set, probably work on the NCAA first before they start working on esports.
yeah, I believe in some of the things that they do. Like I believe in the idea of there's this lack of like athletic direction, we'll call it. That's what it's called in traditional sports. For esports, where you're looking at global your programs and developing them in long-term vision and really structure an organization. So there's some good stuff, but man, is there a lot of bad stuff there too. So I understand that the idea that Europe really does have a more effective use of the sport club, right?
And going back to siding with the player, and I just never, and maybe I'll get flack for this later, but I never understood how the NCAA can profit so much and not be able to share any of that with the athlete outside of just providing him the education, but just having such strict rules that say that he can't tap into anything that he's offered. Otherwise, it's it's a penalty.
It's one of the worst rules ever written by a bunch of rich people for a bunch of non-rich people, and I'll go out and be a little political on this. I don't care. To me, it's always bothered me because there are very few things that are as blatant that it's like it benefits us. So the reason we won't change the rule is A, we're in power, and B, it benefits us. And if we change it, it will benefit us less. Like very few things are as obvious as that.
Hopefully, it's never a problem in terms of esports. Hopefully, we never get that far.
We only have a little more time, but I wanted to. You bring up that point. Something that I think about a lot in esports is I understand that 5, 10 years ago, maybe even a couple years ago, we had a lot more mischievous orgs. And we'll jump back to that first question someone mentioned about here's the Storm team and the really bad owner. And just 2 weeks ago, we had the exact same thing in Challenger and in League of Legends with another bad owner just doing terrible things to their players, etc. But I feel like we're getting further and further from that. We're getting better owners. We're getting owners that take good care of their players and things like that. And I feel sometimes there's still this stigma in esports of owners are bad, and so there's the organizers and the players on one side of the table. We got to protect the players, protect the players, protect the players, and the teams are kind of just pushed out sometimes to say, well, yeah, but we want to make sure we're protecting them. We're not all these big solvent organizations yet, right? Maybe in 5, 10 years we will be, but right now this is still esports. This isn't the NFL or NBA or something. I'm curious from your end. Do you kind of, not even necessarily in World Tanks, just in general, have you seen some of this? Do you see some of the shift happening and how orgs are perceived both by fans and organizations?
Yeah, I'd like to think that the orgs that are most recognizable are there for a positive reason, because they're treating their players well and they're able to focus on the brand itself. But ultimately, I think the space is still just so young. I'm not sure how young we'll call it, but it's so early, and it's kind of like and I think we haven't seen the end of this, but it's almost like a gold rush, and everyone's trying to get involved and monetize in some kind of a way. So there's going to be, going back to the need for patience, it's going to be a while, I think, before this thing sifts itself out, and we start to really see the relationship improve between orgs and players.
Yeah, it's tough because I'll tell you, as a team owner, one of the biggest things I struggle with, it's not the player relationship. I feel like we always have players leaving going, hey, I am leaving because I got this other bigger opportunity, or because we just decided not to work together, whatever it was, but they were really positive about it. They said really great things. We continue to talk to each other, that kind of stuff, A good example is our Counter-Strike team. They didn't make pro. They decided to disband. They didn't want to keep playing. I was like, that's
Sure.
understandable. All 5 of those guys are still super cool with us, because they had a great experience here. We took good care of them. And the other side, though, dealing with sometimes the tournament organizers or the game developers or what have you, and this isn't by no means an across the board, and by no means am I making it as this awful thing, but there is still sometimes a little bit of this contention of, you're still the bad guy, you're still a team owner, so you probably have nefarious thoughts in your head, and we can't trust you quite yet, if that makes sense.
Hmm. Yeah, and like I said earlier, we're actually moving in this direction where we want to see more organizations support our players, and we'll be there all along every step of the way to make sure it's done, effectively, in the interest of all parties. But as far as we're concerned, I don't think there's that impression that the orgs are necessarily the bad guy. I think we still see them as the good guy who's going to help make our players more visible across the space, and hopefully get them resources that didn't exist if they were to pursue this alone. We even have, one of our mainstay teams is Simp, and they've been around since the very beginning, and they insist on driving their own brand, and all power to them if they think they can continue to do that and get sponsors on their own. But just coming back from Brazil again, I'm pretty excited that as soon as this team qualified, they were able to latch on to a decent organization, if they were to get them some professionalism, some more resources, and most of all, visibility across the space.
Yeah, that's cool, I like that. It's a catch-22 for us, I guess you'd say, as owners. Either we're the good guys doing those kind of good things you pointed out, or we're the bad guys who are only looking out for the organization, not taking care of the players, and it's hard to find that middle ground sometimes, I guess you'd say. So catch-22 isn't the right way to say it. I guess I'm just saying that it's hard to be perceived in that middle ground, which is really where you are, right?
Yeah.
You have to take good care of the players, but also the org. I always like to say my staff is much bigger than the roster players we have, and I have to make sure everybody has a job at the end of the day that we can afford to pay all their salaries. So.
Yeah, it's a relationship that's got to be in the best interest of all parties involved. So it's just the way business is.
Here's a good question from chat, I think, that affects, because you guys are worldwide Wargaming. Someone asks, because I was talking to Odie last week from Dignitas, and we were talking about smaller regions like the UK. What do you think about how those regions will expand? I mean, you've probably seen that certain scenes are growing in certain areas outside of our typical EU, NA, Australia, China, Korea, etc. Is that something that's really relevant to you guys?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the Wargaming League, absolutely. We're actually going to restructure our European region so that if anybody out there knows World of Tanks well, knows that the Russians are the best World of Tanks players worldwide,
Right.
hands down. So in order to have a better representation of the European nations who up until now have been pretty much getting dominated by their Eastern counterparts, we're going to restructure EU so that it can focus on not just Western Europe, but specific nations within Europe. So it's something that we've noticed in terms of the Wargame League, and we're going to be working on.
That's cool. Yeah, there's certainly a challenge. I mean, we're a European organization as well, right? We have teams over there, and we see the challenge of when our NA teams are playing. It's easy. It's in English. It is what it is. But now you're in Europe where there's all these languages and all these cultures, and how do you reach all those fans, right? So.
And I think that's that's a benefit. You know,
Oh
if there's
yeah.
I come from soccer is my favorite sport, and there's nothing that for me the world stops during the World Cup. You just don't work for that month and a half. But there's nothing more exciting than international competition. And I think
Yeah.
a place like Europe is just prime for that. You know, you
There's the
got two.
pride factor, man.
Yeah, exactly. You got two neighboring nations. You know, give me your best World of Tanks team. Let's see who wins.
There's a story I like to tell where I was 22 years old and I was traveling Europe and I ended up in Rome and I'd never seen soccer other than like little small high school events, you know. And
Yeah,
I was staying at a hostel that happened to be down the street from the World Cup Stadium, and or the Olympic Stadium it was in Rome.
it's 1990.
No, it wasn't actually going on, but the stadium was
Okay,
there. So you know, it was
right.
already whenever they built it. You know, because this
Yeah,
is '99. No, I don't know, like 2001, I think it was. But anyway, I went out for the day, just visiting the city of Rome, and I come back, and I'm walking, and there were just mopeds everywhere. You literally couldn't drive down the road. There were so many mopeds just parked on the
yeah,
road, you know. And I just walk right past the hostel because I see this light in the distance, and I walk up to the stadium, and there's no guards, there's no one at the first aid station, there's no ticket takers, like it's deserted, and I'm like, what is going on? So I walk in the stadium and I walk up the steps, and as soon as I can see the field, right next to me, my left is all 11 people from the medic station, and on my right is all the ticket takers, and everyone has abandoned their posts. There's 5 minutes left in a 1-1 game between Rome and whatever their rivals were. I forget if it was Florence or something like that. And the stadium is packed. It's the loudest stadium I've ever been in. And we're talking city versus city, not even country
yeah,
versus country.
yeah.
So I've felt that like in the roar of that crowd. And I know esports has that same opportunity, you know, and that
Oh
you're right.
yeah.
It's awesome.
Oh yeah, for sure. I was we have a little Facebook group within Wargaming, and I was sharing the moment. It must have been about 10 or 15 years ago, the Street Fighter tournament, and I think it was Dago where he's parrying Chun Li's super alpha move. But the roar from the audience is ultimately what I think we're all after, and it's why we're part of the esports space.
There are some really cool like I don't know, compilation vids you call them. If you just Google on YouTube of like the all-time like great moments of where the crowd goes wild, and
Yeah.
it's really cool to see that stuff. Well, we're just about time to wrap up here. I like to always give shameless plug opportunities again. So Oscar, you want to tell everyone about your big event coming?
Yeah, of course. We're all set for the Wargaming League Grand Finals. Once a year, it's just the World Cup version of World of Tanks. We just had our seeding show last Friday. That sets up all the groups and how each nation is going to be competing against the other region. We're going to have Brazil there for the first time, but April 8th, April 9th, battleviewer.com. We have 12 teams competing worldwide, so it's going to be about a 10 to 12 hour broadcast every day, so it'll be hard to miss. But I'm super stoked to see how the tier 10, because we did change the tier 10 this last season, and to see what kind of meta comes out at the international stage live when you compare the Chinese to the Russians to the North Americans. So April 8th, April 9th, grand finals.
I'm excited because I call myself the there's those fans that they say I watch football, I watch the Super Bowl, right, and that's all they watch.
Yeah.
I've never played World of Tanks, I never really knew much about it, and then I'll watch when it's in those playoffs or championship phases, and it's always
Yeah.
really exciting, and it's because I love watching the best of the best play,
Yeah,
and
this is
I
it.
don't understand a lot about it, but you can just there's a level of play there that is so great at that level.
And if anyone has something in their bank willing to make the trip to Warsaw, I guarantee it's for a World of Tanks fan, it's almost gonna soon become a pilgrimage. You're gonna have to
Right.
see what it's like to experience the grand finals live, because every tank that gets destroyed is met with cheers from the audience.
I can only
So
imagine.
it's really cool.
Well, Oscar, thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate your time. I'm sure our viewers are interested to know a little more about what it's like to run a league that's been so long running now, and the challenges you face. And hopefully, we have a couple pioneers out there in our chat who will one day run the next esports league. Folks, if you want to catch VODs of SpyCam, this one, of course, will be up as well, probably tomorrow. You can check youtube.com/Splyce. I'll put it in chat here. That's where all of our VODs go, and there's playlists with every other one. We've had Thorin on. We've had Robert Del Papa from Alpha Draft, Rahul Sood from Unicorn. Last week I had Odie from Dignitas, so on and so forth. Next week my guest is going to be Nick Allen from Twitch, formerly of Riot. We'll talk a little bit about big streaming platforms and where they stand in the space. Make sure you hit that follow button down below. Make sure you go check out battleviewer.com, and some World of Tanks action coming up here soon. I know I'll be watching. And see you next week, same time, same channel. Ciao.